Hello. In this video, we're going to see White's other replies at move 4. So after e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, besides knight f3, which is the main move, and d takes e5, White has other continuations, and this is what we're going to see in this chapter. First of all, we're going to discuss knight g2, and then there is f4, there is d5, there's bishop e3, and bishop g5. So let's see them one by one. Knight g2. This is the main move in this chapter. It's a clever move. White, it's also a flexible move. White has different ideas here. First of all, he's defending the d4 pawn so that if e takes d4, there is knight takes d4. And White has several plans, like the most aggressive is f3, bishop e3, then queen d2, g4, long castle, and so on, to push the pawns on the king side and mount an attack. There is also the idea to go h3 and g4, and then bishop g2. And also the more modest idea g3 and bishop g2. In most of these lines, White either develops the bishop on g2 or doesn't develop the light square bishop at all, because for now the bishop is blocked by the white knight on e2. So here we go c6, immediately threatening to get counterplay with b5, and to see if White allows this or not. And here we are at a crossroads again. White has several options. We're going to see f3, g3, h3, quite a rare situation where we see all these little moves. And of course, a4 to stop us from pushing b5. So one of the principal replies is f3. White ignores our threat of b5 and just wants to get on with his play. Bishop e3, queen d2, g4, long side castle, and so on. This is a good setup to get an attack. At the same time, he's reinforcing the e4 pawn. But we can just push b5. And it's important that we manage to get this move, because at the right moment, I'm not saying right now, but at the right moment, we are threatening to push even b4. So White always has to consider it. And here White can go bishop e3, or even to take on e5 and get into an endgame. Otherwise, let's say if White hurries with g4, then we can just counter with b4, knight a4, where else, and then knight bd7. So g4 doesn't achieve anything for White. That's why, let's see, d takes e5, d takes e5, queen d8, and king takes d8. And we get this version of Philidor endgame. Of course, we have the king in the center, but we're not so worried about it. And we managed to play b5. Now, b5 is quite an achievement in this kind of positions, if we manage to stabilize this pawn here. If we manage to go a6, White will not be able to dislodge our pawn from b5. But it's White's turn, and this is the idea, to go a4. And now we are forced to play b4. Otherwise, we either lose a pawn or b takes a4 is a strategical capitulation. So we go b4, knight goes to d1, and white is going to relocate this knight to e3, then maybe c4. Another idea is maybe to bring knight f2, knight d3. a5. This is a useful move for black. First of all, we are defending the pawn on b4 in advance, and we're stopping white from pushing a5. So now we can bring the knight to b6, and we won't be worried about white pushing a5 and attacking our knight. White goes bishop d2. This is a little move. The idea is to reroute the knight from e2 to c1, and then to go to b3. The other knight is going to e3, and then white will fight for the c4 square. Actually, these are very important squares into position c4, c5, and a5. And we need to have adequate control over them. Bishop e6, this is the advantage of having space, that we have good places for our pieces. This bishop is excellently placed here, and it's controlling the very important square c4. Next, we can follow with knight b d7. White goes knight c1. Almost all the pieces are on the first rank, but they will not remain there. The knights will go to, one of the knights will go to b3 and the other one to e3. Knight b d7. Knight e3. And here it's an important moment. We need to understand what white wants to do. And white's idea is, of course, to play bishop c4 and to trade the light squared bishops, which is advantageous for him. So we need to stop this, but we're just in time to stop the opponent's threat by playing knight b6, and now c4 square is well defended. White goes knight d3 with an obvious threat to take on e5, but we can easily parry it with knight f d7. So now we successfully parried all white's threats, and we have more space because of this pawn on b4. We could maybe try to gain more space on the king side with h5. King c7 is a useful move. The king won't remain on d8. And also f6 could be good to support the e5 pawn. In the meantime, white doesn't have a clear plan. Maybe one idea is to go b3, knight b2, and then fight for the c4 square, but it's taking too long, this idea. So the endgame is about equal, but I like black's chances here. Let's go back. Let's see bishop e3. A very natural move, continuing the development. Anyway, after f3, the bishop belongs to e3. White wants to go queen d2 or g4. It depends, and try to get an attack, push the pawns on the king side. Here we go, knight b d7. Okay, so it was important that we managed to get b5 on the board, but now we don't want to allow white to trade on e5 anymore and swap the queens. So that's why you go knight b d7. And here there is g4, a3, and queen d2. Just to mention that here or later on, if white is playing d5, how to react against this push. We pair it with bishop b7, and now d5 is not suddenly d5 is not a good move. If white takes, we can take with the bishop, and the b5 pawn is defended. So let's see, g4. White doesn't want to waste time and just push the g pawn. G5 is probably his next move, and we need to react quickly here. We play b4, attacking the white knight. Knight a4, this is the best square for the knight, the best square available. Of course, white doesn't want to play knight a4 by himself, but he has no choice here. And here it's good to stop g5, so that's why we go h6. And we're going to break the center soon. Let's say queen d2. White is continuing the development, maybe looking at the b4 pawn, but it's probably not really a threat because of d5. And here we want to break the center, but first of all, it's good to play queen a5, hitting the white knight and forcing white to play b3. And now we go d5. Before white manages to castle and develop his pieces. Now, of course, the position is very unclear because all the pieces are on the board. The central pawns face each other. But objectively, black is fine here. The d5 push was made just in time. I'm going to show you a sample line here just to get an idea of how crazy the position is. So, for example, long castle, we can take on e4, d takes e5, knight e5, and it looks like black just got a pawn for free with excellent position, but white has a tactical strike. This is what he was counting on, bishop b6. Now the queen is under attack and there is this threat of queen d8, so that a takes b6 would just be a blunder in view of queen d8 checkmate. However, fascinating position, I have to say. However, black has resources here, so knight d3. This check is good. And queen takes d3, queen g5 check, and black is fine here. So as you see, this is simply a crazy line. And this is the kind of positions you can get by playing d6 first move. Okay, let's go back. Usually white doesn't want to allow b4 and he needs to consider b4 every move. That's why natural prophylactic move can be a3 to stop b4 once and for all. White is delaying queen d2 for now, but here it's good to stop white from playing g4. We can just go h5. So white also doesn't get his attack. Now the situation changed. The game will be more strategical, but I don't see exactly what white will do with his king, because it's very natural to try to still try to castle long, but once the king gets to, after long castle, the king gets to c1, then this a3 pawn will be a big weakness, and if we manage to play b4, we'll have a strong attack. So probably white is better advised to just leave the king in the center or try to castle short. But there are some other problems, like what to do with the knight on e2, where to develop this bishop on f1. Let's go back. So queen d2 is a main move. The queen belongs there, obviously, and white is ready to castle long. Here we are finishing the development. Bishop e7, very natural move. It was also possible to stop white's pawn push with h5. This deserves attention. But why not just develop a piece first? Bishop e7. And here, there is a3, there is knight g3, and g4. First of all, let's see a3. Again, it's very tempting, and it makes sense for white to stop us from playing b4. Like this, white is also securing the knight on c3. And here we have a typical move. Okay, castle, first of all, we finish the development. Again, this is probably the last moment we can still include h5 to stop white from pushing g4. But let's castle just to finish with it. g4, yes, and now is the important moment. Knight b6. Typical idea. We want to jump to c4 and white needs to stop this. Knight g3, this is how white is stopping this, now opening the bishop from f1. And I need to act quickly again until white has time to develop his pieces. Now, of course, g5 is a threat already, but we just take on d4. Bishop d4, this is more flexible because if white takes with the queen, then there is c5 anyway. Bishop d4, and now c5. Simply to open up the game. Bishop takes f6. There is also a point if what if white goes, let's say, bishop f2, but then after d5, black has very good counterplay in this position. The game opens up, and you can see that we have a safe king, whereas white's king is still in the center. The pawns are hanging, especially b5 pawn, but which pawn to take and how to do it with white, I feel rather in danger with white here. That's why it makes sense to take on f6. Bishop takes, and now bishop takes b5. This is the point. White is winning a pawn, but now we have this dark square bishop, which is extremely strong, especially since white weakened his position with this g4 push. And here there is a nice move, bishop d4. I like this. Just not to allow white to castle short. So now we're controlling this square. And black has very good compensation here. For example, it's not easy to play with white. For example, knight g2, there is queen h4 check. And then what to do with the king? King d1, but then the king is stuck in the center. If knight c2, just to try to attack this bishop, but then we can take the pawn on... we can take the pawn b2. And finally, if white tries to just castle long, which makes sense, then we can play a6, first of all attacking this bishop on b5, and we're going to follow up with rook b8, hitting on b2 later on, and black has great compensation in this position. I like black's position very much. Let's go back. And there is g4. Again, white wants to push g5 as soon as possible. And g4 is an ambitious move. We need to react quickly. Knight b6 is the typical reply, preparing a knight jump to c4. White goes the usual knight g3 in order to control the c4 square. Also, the knight is quite well placed on g3. But now, because white skipped the move a3, we can go b4, hitting the c3 knight. Knight d1, there is no better square available because knight c2, there is a problem with knight c4. So knight d1. Of course, the knight is really misplaced on d1. Here we take on d4. We want to open up the position because of this misplaced knight on d1. White takes with the queen this time, and we can just castle. And then d5 is going to be our next move with a very nice initiative because of this misplaced knight on d1. And also the king is stuck in the center. So obviously white's strategy didn't work out in this variation. Let's go back. And finally, white can go knight g3. There's a direct threat to jump to f5. Of course, ideally, white wanted to include the move g4 first, but there is no time for it. And also, it was quite a weakening. And we discussed it before. Okay, what to do now? We play b4 and we're chasing the c3 knight right away. Knight a4, this is relatively the best square. Of course, the knight was better placed on c3, but that square is not available anymore. And now, typically when we start to these operations with b4 and so on, we want to open up the center. So e takes d4, queen takes d4. And now, typical move here, c5. This comes with tempo, hitting the queen. And it's good that we also defend the b4 pawn. And this is an important pawn because it keeps the white knight out of play. It controls the c3 square. Okay, let's say queen d2. We are just in time to castle now. And white's knight is stranded on a4. We could attack it later on. Our next moves could be, let's say, knight d5, knight b6, or even d5 here. But of course, it depends on what white is doing. On the other hand, in this line, white didn't weaken his position with g4. But still, the knight is stranded on a4. And we castled, and I think we got good counterplay here. Obviously, the position remains complicated. Let's go back. And now let's see g3. It's quite a modest move. It's passive, very solid. White just wants to fianchetto the bishop to g2, doing nothing about our threat, so we gain space with b5. Also now b4 is a threat. White should take it into account with e4 pawn hanging. So he goes bishop g2, bishop e7. Now once we manage to get b5 on the board, we can just continue with normal development. Natural moves, castle, castle. Well, at some point, white should probably play e3. Let's say he goes for it, because it's very annoying. Like all the time we're threatening b4, and white doesn't know when we're going to do it or not. So a3 makes a lot of sense. Knight bd7, and just with natural moves, we got a good position. We didn't do anything special here. Let's say h3. And now just to show you the plans that black has, a5. This is the right idea to try to prepare before. Of course, we cannot go b4 right away, but we want to go bishop a6 and then follow up with b4. So let me point this out, g4 and then bishop a6. Idea is to go b4 and then black just got a very good position. It's not clear to me how white is going to defend against this b4 idea. So I like black's position here. h3, g3, the g3 move is probably too passive. g3, too passive. And then there is h3. This is an ambitious move. White wants to go g4 in one go. We continue our plan. Of course, we go b5 with the same threat of going b4 and snatching the e4 pawn. h3, now this is the only reasonable move to stop us from playing b4. And here we can just play h5 and not allow white to push g4. It's actually an important move to stop white from playing g4. And here we have two alternatives. There's g3, the most played move, and knight g1. Let's start with knight g1, which looks like a weird move. Of course, strategically it's justified because the knight is much better on f3. Now that we have this weak pawn on h5, also weak square on g5. But white is wasting 2 tempi with this. So it's debatable whether it's worth it to reroute the knight to f3. Now we just complete the development. What to do? Knight bd7, knight f3, bishop e7, all natural moves. And here black has a small lead in the development, but we have this weakness of h5 and possibly g5 square. However, we want to go queen c7, bishop b7, a6, and at some point we'll probably castle short, but we need to make sure that white is not able to attack us. And when we castle short, then we should have we should be ready to have good counterplay in the center, to break the center and to counter in the center. So just not to fall under some attack. The position is unclear, and I think black can be happy with the result of the opening. Also because white lost to tempi. So this is knight g1. Now the most played move is g3. Well, since white cannot go g4, he's going to go g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop. Now the knight on e2 is misplaced because it has no squares to go. Of course, it's defending the d4 pawn, but the knight is stuck there, and I think in this kind of positions it's important to keep the pawn on e5 because it's limiting this knight on e2. So we definitely don't want to take on d4 because then we open up white's pieces. So here, of course, just natural developing moves: bishop e7, bishop g2, knight bd7. So it was important to include that pawn on h5 to stop white's counterplay. And now we get normal development, castle, bishop b7, nothing special about these moves. Bishop e3, just don't forget to complete the development. And now the king is not in danger on the king side, so we can just castle. We are finishing the development. We have ideas. For example, black can play here rook e8. The rook would be more useful here, maybe to keep the f8 square for the bishop. And also there is queen c7, there is a5. So plenty of ideas for black. In the meantime, I don't see a constructive plan for white. So black is doing great here. Let's go back. So finally, let's see a4. A4 is very natural move. White just wants to stop us from playing b5. And most of the time during a practical game, it's difficult to assess the consequences of allowing your opponent to play b5. That's why many times a4 is an automatic move. And here we go, bishop e7. We want to finish the development. I think in these positions, it's important to first to develop the bishop and the castle rather than going knight bd7, because most of the time we want to, later on, we want to take on d4 and then play d5 to open up the game. So it's better to keep the knight on b8. Also, in some special cases, let's say we could try to bring the knight to b4, since b4 looks like a nice square now that white played a4. But the main idea is to just castle and take on d4 and go d5. And here we're going to see g3 and h3. h3 is the more ambitious move. White think he has time to go g4 and bishop g2, and then, to gain a tempo with this g4 in one go. Of course, it's better if white manages to get g4. For now, we can just castle and see what white does. Here there is g4, bishop e3. Bishop e3 looks really like a mix of plans for white. But why not? It's possible since the g4 square is under control. And here we have this idea to go knight a6. I mentioned it before. Sometimes there is this idea, and here it works very well. The knight is jumping to b4, which is a great square for the knight, since it cannot be attacked there. Also, this is possible because white has this knight on e2 blocking the bishop, so there is no bishop a6. Let's say white continues his expansion with g4. Otherwise, it's not easy to develop this bishop on f1. That's why he goes g4 with the idea to play bishop g2. Of course, we're not going to leave the knight on a6. The knight jumps to b4. And we have a great knight here. We want to follow up with the e takes d4 and d5, which is of course an improved version now that the knight is developed to b4 and also targeting c2 in some cases. So black is doing great here, I would say. And that's why most of the time white just goes g4 to immediately develop the bishop to g2. And now if we allow white to get his grip, finish the development, white would be a bit better, but it's our turn and we just break the center, e takes d4. This is the right moment. Queen takes d4 is the better move here. Knight d4. After knight d4, d5, black is already a bit better, and just look at the white king stuck in the center, and white wasn't even in time to develop the bishops. So white is experiencing problems here already. That's why queen d4 and d5. So our idea is quite simple. That's why it was better to leave this knight on b8 and develop with bishop e7 and castle. And now we got a good version of this. E takes d5, c takes d5. Okay, in this position we got an isolated pawn, but we're going to play knight c6, hitting the queen. And then we have useful moves like bishop e6, rook e8, bishop b4. So we have good control over the center and good piece play. And here I wouldn't be so concerned about the isolated pawn. I think black is doing fine. I like this position for black. Then there is g3. White just wants to develop the bishop to g2. And here we can show a little bit accuracy by first taking on d4. Of course, natural move is castle. And if you don't remember, you can just play castle. But it's a bit more precise to take on d4 just to see how white is going to take back. And now there is knight d4 and queen d4. Yeah, the point is that if queen d4, here we can play d5 straight away without castling. So d5, e takes d5 is probably the better move. There is also e5. I'm going to show you briefly. But after knight fd7, e6, what to do? Knight f6, black is already better. Now, I want to point out that this pawn chain c6 and d5 is always very strong, and we're going to see this in other lines as well. Particularly here, this is opposed against this bishop on that will be on g2, so the bishop is hitting nowhere. This pawn chain is also limiting the white knight from c3. So this gives us long-term advantage. And here, actually after this play with e5 and e6, white is going to trade the e pawn for the f pawn. So we're gonna have a very nice central pawn on d5. So that's why e5 is not recommended. E takes d5, white has to go for this. We're going to take back with the pawn. And yeah, we have an isolated pawn, but we'll play knight c6 afterwards, hitting the queen with tempo. So let's say bishop g2, knight c6, queen d1. Well, the queen is less exposed there. It's not possible to find a better square for the queen. Here we can be a bit more ambitious, just to go d4, and of course it's an achievement to push the isolated pawn, thus gaining even more space. Knight b5 is the move. White can win a pawn with bishop c6, but b takes e6, queen takes d4, queen a5, and we keep the queens on the board, obviously. And now we have the bishop pair, and the light square bishop is really strong here, especially since white weakened his king side with this g3 move. So there are all kind of weak squares on the king side. There's more than enough compensation for black here. This is the kind of positions that you want to get from the opening, where you have good chances to play for the initiative and to win the game. But okay, knight b5. Now white is threatening again the d4 pawn. And we go bishop c5, defending the pawn, with a nice position for black because of the space advantage. And in the games, Kuhala Jovanovic played in Nova Gorica 2020, black won quickly. So let me just point out this strong pawn on d4. Of course, we want to castle. Afterwards, we can drive back this knight from b5. So castle, rook e8, I don't know, develop the bishop somewhere, bishop f5, bishop g4 this looks like a great position for black. And it was proved in practice. So going back, the more logical capture here is knight takes d4, bringing the knight in the center. Because as we have seen, the queen was exposed on d4. And here we can castle. But don't worry, d5 will be our next move. So again, we're going to break the center, bishop g2, and d5. This is the point. We want to break in the center before white has time to coordinate his pieces, for example, to go castle and rook e1. Then d5 will afterwards would not be so effective. And here we have, as usual, e5 or e takes d5. e5, well, it's more, I see it like a more ambitious move, but on the other hand, again, it leaves us with this strong pawn chain c6 and d5. So white is taking some risks with this move, although it's gaining space. Knight g4, the knight is more active here than on d7, but this line is already quite concrete. So we are attacking the e5 pawn. White has to defend it. However, now white is threatening h3 to drive our knight away. So we need to react really quickly with f6, immediately challenging the white center. And here, okay, if white takes on f6, then this move f4 was a weakening, and black has a very nice position. So white is going e6, attacking our knight, and uh, saying that, okay, the pawn on e6 is very strong, and he's going to keep it. I mean, the pawn on e6 is strong, but can also be vulnerable. And here the only move is f5, stopping white from solidifying the pawn on e6 with f5 himself. So f5, we defend the knight on g4. And now our idea is to go maybe bishop c5 or g6, knight f6 to have f5 defended. And little by little round up this e6 pawn. On the other hand, white has to show something because, again, this pawn chain is very strong, c6 and d5, and the white bishop is hitting nowhere. So it is up to white to show some play. So he has to find some very good and precise moves to keep the balance. Of course, the position is complex, but black is doing well. This is the kind of position I wouldn't like to have with the white pieces because it's up to white to show something. For black, I think it's very easy to play, just to attack the pawn on e6 little by little. So he takes d5. This is the more logical approach. C takes d5, castle, knight c6. Again, we have this isolated pawn, but for it we have good play in the center. All our pieces have very natural squares. White goes h3. It's good to include this move because maybe we wanted to play some bishop g4, attacking the queen. And we can also play h6, a useful move because we want to move the bishop. This e7 bishop, we want to move it away. We want to jump maybe to b4. Since this square is available to us, white played a4. But before moving the bishop to b4, we need to make sure g5 is under control. We don't want to allow white to pin us. There's a long fight ahead, interesting fight. The position is about equal. Of course, black has useful moves like bishop b4, rook e8, and so on. I wouldn't be concerned about black's position here, and I quite like it, actually. Okay, let's go back. So basically this was knight g2. And now let's see other moves, other possible moves for white here. Let's see f4. So f4 is justified if black had a knight or if black plays knight bd7, but in this particular situation we can just take on d4, which we do, queen d4, and now knight c6. And this comes with tempo and the knight is much better placed on c6. And here, okay, the most played move is bishop b5, and there is also queen e3. Let's see. Let's see queen e3 first, probably the better move. So why does the queen go to e3? Just to not to allow us to go d5. No, sorry, not queen e3 here. Doesn't make sense. First of all, to include bishop b5, bishop d7. Yes, yes, it's like this. Not queen e3 immediately was not to the point. So bishop b5, bishop d7. Yes, we're attacking the queen again. And now, yes, now there is bishop c6 and queen e3. And yeah, queen e3 is the better move. Of course, it is better for white to have bishop b5 and bishop d7 included. Because it wants to stop ideas with the d5. But no worries, we can just go bishop e7, bishop d2 to castle, long castle. And now a6 is a useful move to hit the light square bishop, because later on we can push b5 and start an attack or pawn push on the queen side. And also rook e8 is a very useful move just to put the rook on the same file with the white queen. Then maybe bishop f8 at some point. And I like black's chances here. I think black is pushing faster on the queen side. Okay, bishop takes e6. This was played more often. White is keeping the queen on d4. Bishop takes. Knight f3, the most natural move. White is ready to castle short. And now we have this nice move, knight e4, which works. The tactics work for us. But if you don't remember it, it's also good to go g6 and then bishop g7, castle, rook e8 with very comfortable position for black. However, if you do remember, knight takes e4 works and black is slightly better afterwards. Knight e4 and then queen e7. There is the spin. This is what we're counting on. There is the spin on the e file. So we're going to take the piece back with the bishop e4 probably, and then we can support the bishop with d5 or even f5. And white has some compensation for the pawn, but it's not enough. Okay, let's see something else. d5. This is too early. White doesn't want to push the pawn like this. And also, this would have made more sense if the white pawn was on c4, not on c2. But like this, d5 is not flexible at all, and we can just challenge this pawn chain with c6. And it is not clear what white is going to do next. But our next moves can be like bishop e7, c takes d5, and so on. Black is doing great here. There's also bishop e3. This move makes sense, but here the g4 square is not controlled by white. So that's why it's rarely seen in practice. And of course, we go knight g4. And it's that kind of positions where white already has to take a decision regarding the bishop on e3. Here we're going to see bishop c1 and bishop c4. First of all, let's see bishop c4, going for a quick development, but then knight takes e3, f takes. Yeah, I just want to mention here that we can delay taking on e3. For example, bishop e7 is a good move. But let's say we bishop c4, let's say we take on e3, takes. And now we recommended this funny line and interesting, crazy line with queen h4. However, if you don't want to go queen h4 because it's a queen sortie in the opening, you can just go bishop e7 or knight d7. There is nothing wrong with these moves. Black has a very decent position. But okay, let's say you're more ambitious. Queen h4, g3. So g3 is a weakness. And now the queen can go to h6, eyeing the pawn on e3. However, now we can see that c7 is not well defended. And also we are lagging a bit in development. And white can try to take advantage of this by going knight d5, attacking the c7 pawn. Here, we can defend the pawn with king d8. It looks dangerous, but white's king is still in the center, and this knight on d5 is quite exposed. We can drive it back with c6. Let's not forget e3 pawn is under attack. White can try to win a pawn with d takes e5. Of course, we don't want to take back on e5 because then there is knight b6 check. But we can cover the d file with knight d7, threatening knight e5 to get a great knight on e5. We are playing for quick development. Also, there is a c6 threat, and then e3 pawn is hanging. And if white takes on d6, then bishop d6, and there is a threat of bishop takes g3. Black is having a fantastic position here. And instead of bishop c4, there is also bishop c1, inviting for a move repetition. Of course, we can go knight f6 if we want this, but there is also e takes d4, queen d4, knight c6, hitting the queen. Now the queen goes back to d1. I just want to mention that if bishop b5, we can go bishop e7, and then the idea is to castle. And of course, queen g7 is impossible because of bishop f6. The queen is trapped. So white should definitely avoid this. Okay, queen d1. And now it's interesting to go f5 to challenge the white central pawn. And this works because we have this knight on g4. White gave us some tempi. But there is nothing wrong with knight f6 if you just want to retreat the knight. And then white made this maneuver, queen d4, queen d1, which is just a waste of time. So this is bishop e3. It's not a really challenging move, and it's not seen in the practice. It's only very rarely played. There's also bishop g5. One can wonder why this is not a good move to just pin the knight. Usually pins are problematic, but here bishop g5 is not strong. I mean, anyway, we want to play bishop e7 to address this pin, and then the bishop is going to be misplaced here. But here we can even take advantage of this move by going h6 first, asking a question: what is white going to do with the bishop? And okay, bishop h4 is the main move. We're going to see a little bit bishop f6. So if bishop f6, white gives up the bishop, queen f6, and then we have good play on the dark squares. Knight d5 is mm, just very easy to be paired with queen d8, defending on c7, and then the knight is not going to stay on d5. We can drive it back with c6. So let's say bishop h4, but now we can go knight b d7, and we want to follow up with c6 and bishop e7, and the bishop is misplaced on h4. It was better for white to have the bishop on this diagonal, on c1, h6 diagonal, maybe on c1 or e3. Those were better squares for the bishop. Like this, the bishop is misplaced, and black has an easy play. Okay, so let's. This was the chapter. Let's recap a little bit. The main move in this chapter is knight e2, which is a flexible move, allowing white to several plans, either to go f3 and bishop e3, or h3 g4, or even g3 bishop g2. But then we go c6, and we start our counterplay quickly with b5. If white wants to stop our counterplay and goes a4, then there is bishop e7. Idea is to castle and then take on d4 and go d5. And the other moves don't put any real problems to black. For example, f4, white has to lose some tempo with the queen because of e takes e4 and knight c6. Thank you for watching.